This is a presentation of Northeast Streaming Sports.
Hey, welcome to the Start Spreading the News show. Figured we'd go with a little bit of a different introduction today to see how that would go. I'm not sure. We'll have to see what EJ says. Paul Semendinger here along with EJ. Did you like the rock and roll, EJ?
That felt like I was getting ready to go on a motorcycle, and I don't know, but yeah, and go break something. So great intro, but I don't think our intro.
It was. I figured it was an upgrade from the countdown with the 30 second thing in the coming at us. So anyway, so it looks like you're on vacation. Looks like you're in Arizona. Yep. How is everything out there?
It's wonderful. The cacti are still here, and it's beautiful. It's 95 degrees out, but a very nice 95 degrees out, and we're here for the week. So
that's awesome. Week. So. EJ, the Yankees, a week ago we were getting concerned. The Yankees were back on a tailspin, but then they just did pretty well. They seem to be back on the upswing. They just had a nice weekend against the Padres. Now they're out on the West Coast. And, we talked a little last week about all the streaming services and the different ways to watch the Yankees. This would be a great week to have the Yankees on those streaming services because I don't stay up till midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning watching the games. I couldn't care less if they were on Peacock or Prime or anything this week with all the late games.
Excuse me. I picked a great week to be on West Coast time because the game starts at 6:40 p.m. my time here in Arizona. Arizona is on Pacific time during the summer. And it's wonderful. I'm excited. I get to watch that game that I normally would not watch, a Seattle Mariners series or a Los Angeles Dodgers series.
They're going to play the Dodgers. Yep.
And I always miss those games because I love the West Coast teams. There's a lot of fun on those West Coast teams. I really am excited to watch the Dodgers. I'm excited to watch this new young Mariners team, even if they're kind of underperforming a little bit. And I think that the Yankees are going to have a good week. It feels like this team is doing well. You mentioned it looked. Yeah, I was getting a little nervous, right? They were losing some games to the Orioles. It really felt like I don't know. The series could have gone very differently had they not given up 8 runs in 1 inning. But I think in the grand scheme of things, it feels like even when the Yankees have been losing over the last few weeks, that they've been in every game. They either come back or it's their bullpen that blows a close game. And that's a good sign, right? Even against like the Rays, some of the games they lost against the Rays, they could have won those games. The games they lost against the Blue Jays, I mean, it really did feel like this team is contending and in every game. And against a not particularly great San Diego Padres team, you lose that first game, and I don't know. It felt a little bit like that like something we're entering a bad stretch. But then they pulled it out. I've been really impressed with this team, and they've been a lot of fun to watch. And the great news is that this is still an injured team. It's a team that's going to be getting really good players back over the next 3 or 4 weeks. Tommy Kahnle should be back any day now. Giancarlo Stanton mentioned he might be back against the Dodgers. That seems a little much. I suspect he's going to have a rehab assignment plus a long trip to the West Coast. But as a California kid, makes sense that he wants to play against the Dodgers. And then, Carlos Rodon, whenever he gets back, then you start having a full team. And if this team is on track to win 90-something games without the full team, I'd love to see what it can do with the full team.
Right. So I'm high on Kahnle if he actually can pitch. He hasn't pitched in years, but he's a highly talented guy. I'm very high on Rodon because he's a super pitcher and he's a potential ace. As a number 2 guy, he's phenomenal. Forgive me if I'm not excited about Giancarlo Stanton. The ship has sailed. I'm not saying the Yankees did a bad job getting him. I was 100% behind that trade. I was so glad they picked him up. But I think his best days are behind him. He comes in, he'll be slow. He'll get off to a slow start because that's what he normally does when he comes back from an injury. He'll have a week or 2. That's great. And then we'll miss him for a month again. And the Yankees, I think, will say, let's put him in the outfield. Where when we saw him trying to play the outfield at the beginning of the season, he was falling and diving after balls, but looking very awkward. And it'll just be more of the same. I think the ship has sailed. I'm not excited. I like him. I wish he would hit 50 home runs, but I'm just not excited about Giancarlo Stanton being an impact player.
So I mean, I'm with you on the. I wish they hadn't done the trade, right? Um, I think though, if you separate his contract status from what he can do for this team, and I apologize if I'm breaking up. Tell me
Yeah, a little bit.
if I'm breaking up too much. Um, if you separate that contract status, then all of a sudden you're talking about a player who can hit, right? I mean, a pretty good DH, and even if not a great DH by like compared to some other top DHs or compared to Stanton in the past, a huge upgrade at DH. You'd be replacing Willie Calhoun with Giancarlo Stanton. That's a big upgrade. And even if he hits like he did earlier this season, which was like about a 300 on base and about a high five slugging, that's a great upgrade.
All right, so let me ask you this then. Giancarlo Stanton comes back, and he's going to be batting 4th or 5th. Willie Calhoun was batting 6th or 7th. If Stanton comes back and he bats 6th or 7th, I have less of a problem with him being the shadow of who he used to be. I think sometimes we get caught in this, right? Like Giancarlo Stanton isn't the player he was before. So he's not really a cleanup hitter anymore. But the Yankees have the name Giancarlo Stanton, so they're going to put him into the cleanup spot instead of putting him probably lower in the order where he probably fits a lot better then. And then he's not as much of a drag. Do you buy that?
I mean, look, I'd love to have better players or later in the order. I mean, who's he displacing? Displacing DJ LeMahieu, who's been hitting a little better recently, but on the season, I think, has not been a particularly great hitter. And a player who might even be better low in the order when you talk about, say, like putting him in a place where some guys can run. And I just don't feel like he's protection for Rizzo and Judge at this point, DJ LeMahieu. Harrison Bader. I mean, Bader's at times been pretty good, and I think there's a good argument that Harrison Bader is about as good as Stanton right now. But I think we've seen basically the best of Bader. That is 500 slugging percentage, 300 on base, right? Like good hitter, but not a player you'd be that excited about if it wasn't for his defense. And his defense is very exciting. Stanton. I mean, I think there's a world where Stanton is bad, or he could be last year's Stanton. Even last year, Stanton slugged, in the high 400s. The Yankees would kill for that player, right now. Right now, they're dealing with very bad production out of a lot of lineup spots. So not only could you potentially have a DH, but you could potentially also maybe push out some players who've been sitting in that DH spot or effectively sitting in that DH spot by covering for other players. I also think there's a role for Stanton is the good version of Giancarlo Stanton that we've seen, I think 4 periods over the last few years. If you look at his expected numbers, they're still really strong. So he still hits the ball so hard that you would expect him to have better numbers than he has at times. Now, some of that is because I think he kind of just breaks StatCast a little bit. StatCast doesn't have a lot of balls in the record at 115 miles an hour ground balls. And Stan hits a lot of those. He hits a lot of ground balls that almost kill an infielder, but they still make the out. So that's a little bit concerning. That said, I don't think he's getting released. I don't think they should release him. I think the Yankees need an upgrade at DH, and I think he's the best available upgrade.
Okay. Just to be clear, I'm not saying they should release him. They're not going to release him. I'm just not having a parade going down the street saying, "Oh my goodness, Stanton comes back, the Yankees are going to be great." I think Stanton comes back and he'll be a disappointment, and they're going to put him in a spot in the order where I think he's going to be a drag, rather than putting him lower in the order where he's going to have to play. So bat him 7th, and let's see what happens, and make him earn.
If he comes back and he's injured, I agree with you. Right. I think the problem with Stanton is he's been playing hurt a lot as a Yankee. He's gone on the DL and the IL less than he used to over the last few years. But the problem is that he's been playing in a diminished state. And I hope that he comes back. This is a hamstring strain, which is a different injury than we've dealt with before. And I hope he comes back and he's 100%. I hope he doesn't come back and he's 100%. That said, early this season, he had a 402 expected weighted on base percentage, xFOBA, according to StatCast. That is a significant improvement over his last couple of years. The numbers were mostly showing up on the field. His on base was still a little low relative to expectations, but his power rating was pretty good. And so I think there's a world where Stanton is actually like I could actually really transform this team. Could really be a third hitter behind Judge and Rizzo. That is very, very good. And then all of a sudden you start talking about Harrison Bader as your sixth hitter or LeMahieu as your sixth hitter. That's a good place to be. That all of a sudden you start looking at a lineup that has some length that the Yankees really haven't seen in a while. There's been a lot of disappointments in the Yankee bottom half of the order, and if you can knock one of those players out, I just think it could be just a huge lift for this team. That said, I mean, I think Carlos Rodon's a bigger player to get back, which he's still a distance away. I think Canely is a pretty good player to get back. And I think this is the team that's going to get better. It's a team that's going to buy at the trade deadline. And I think given the injuries the Yankees have suffered so far, I think we're about to see a really good period of baseball.
Well, let's hope so. You are much more optimistic about the Yankees than I am. I would love to be more optimistic. So let's move on. Yankees have another big time free agent signing, or actually from a couple of years ago, and his name is Gerrit Cole. I believe Gerrit Cole was the Yankee MVP through the month of April, but May came around and his ERA is up over 5, and he had a whole bunch of starts. He had started off 5-0, I believe. I think he won his first 4 starts, got a no decision, then he won his next
ERA
start.
of like 1, yeah.
Yeah, and he was unbelievable. And in May, his ERA is up over 5. He's had a whole bunch of games where he hasn't looked good. He did get a win, and I know pitcher wins are what they are, but he got a win his last time out the other day, though he didn't really pitch all that well. He went 6 innings, gave up 6 runs, I think 5 earned. But on the other hand, in his 12 starts, the Yankees have a record of 10 wins and 2 losses. And I think that's the more important statistic. How does the team do when he starts? Not necessarily his own statistics. But anyway, he's had a great April. He's had a less than great May. Should we be concerned about Gerrit Cole?
I think if you look at the season numbers on a whole, he's leading the league in innings pitched, and he is got an ERA under 3. The home runs are a problem because that's been the problem for him in recent years. And to me, that's what I'm concerned about. The great thing about April is he didn't give up any home runs. And now he's giving them up at a very, very fast rate. I think the thing to remember about Gerrit Cole, I'm going to check his age. Gerrit Cole's not a young player. He's 32 years old. And I think we should expect Gerrit Cole to get old. And I think aging Gerrit Cole is still a pretty great pitcher. I think that he has so far this season shown that there is a version of him where he is a Cy Young Award winner still. But a player with an ERA of 3 is going to have some bad starts, have some bad stretches, and have some really good stretches. And I think that's what we're seeing here. This is just kind of what you're paying for. The Yankees, they signed him to that big contract. And the first season of the big contract, when you think about your big contract, you want to pay off early, right? Mm-hmm. You're buying a player at their peak, and you're hoping that their decline years will be pretty good. Gerrit Cole's first season was the COVID season. And so the Yankees, they kind of missed out on one of their peak Gerrit Cole seasons. He's been pretty good since then. But last year he had an ERA over 3 because he's in his 30s, right? We should expect him to have an ERA that's not leading the league. And to me, that's what we're seeing. And I think the version of Gerrit Cole that we're going to have for the next few years is going to be this kind of version that at times puts it all together and he's dominant, throwing 99. Players aren't hitting the fastball or balls are just barely getting caught. And sometimes you're going to have him, have that Rougned Odor homer a couple nights ago where, that was a pretty weak home run, right? That was a ball that was a big, lofty fly ball that just barely stayed fair. That's what happens when you are a good pitcher, but not a truly great pitcher. And that, to me, is the Gerrit Cole that we have. You think about, late career David Cone, late career Roger Clemens, late career to some extent Andy Pettit, some of these players that we watched age, they all aged pretty gracefully. CC Sabathia, but they also weren't as good as they were when they were 27. And I think Cole's just kind of human that same way.
Yeah, and the thing about Cole that I'm very impressed with is he goes out there every fifth day. He doesn't miss games. I get on a lot of these guys, Stanton and Bader and Aaron Hicks before he was released, who are always injured, right? Garrett Cole goes out there. I mean, there's value in a guy who's on the field who you can count on every fifth day. He's going to go out. He's going to give you as many innings as he can. Now, do I wish he was pitching 9 innings a start? Of course I do, but this is not 1974. And he gets you to the 6th inning, and that's really all a pitcher's supposed to do now.
And he gets you to the 6th inning in a bad start.
Yes.
Right. I mean, to me, that's the difference, is that he will occasionally give you 8+ innings. He did this year. He had that really cool shutout. He's leading the league in innings.
Yeah, that's
what
you said that before. Yeah, exactly.
But he's also a guy that, sometimes he's gonna have to be pulled in the 7th inning, which was his last start. And frankly, I think if that Rougned Odor home run doesn't go out, I think we're having a different discussion about Garrett Cole. He's also not immune to the third time through the order problem. Nestor Cortez is really having that problem this season, where he's really good 2 times through the order and not great the third time. Major league hitters are really good at adjusting to pitchers. And I think one of the realities of a diminishing Garrett Cole is you might have to treat him a little bit like a human player who third time through the order is going to get hammered. And that's how most other starting pitchers have to deal with. And it's the Cy Young Award winners who can make it through the third time, still face a penalty, but still be better than most of the other options. But 32-year-old Garrett Cole, maybe not. Maybe you should pitch him fewer innings. If it's a close game, maybe you should pull him. If the Yankees had a bullpen right now, maybe you would pull him earlier. Their problem is they don't. And so they just kind of need those guys to go a little bit later into games, because they've played so many games with so few off days. There have been so many close games that you're really burning through the bullpen. And I think it's been a bit of a problem.
Can't disagree with anything you said. This might bring up a little bit of a disagreement. I don't think you and I see 100% on the Anthony Volpe thing. EJ, are you a connoisseur of fine wines or anything like that?
I am not a fan of wine, but
all right, neither am I.
I like fine things. Yeah.
All right, so I don't know anything about wine. If I was going to buy a bottle and there was a $9.99 bottle and a $39.99 bottle, I wouldn't know the difference. I'd probably buy the $6.99 bottle, right? Like whatever. But there's a saying, like a fine wine has to be aged, right? Like you can't rush it. You can't rush greatness. And my concern with the Yankees all year long is that they rushed Anthony Volpe. I don't think anybody expected him to be here in the big leagues. He had the great spring training. I have no problem with the Yankees bringing him up. But I wanted them to bat him 9th and just sit there. Play 9th, bat 9th, no pressure. Like a fine wine, we will let you aged and become part of the team gracefully. But then the Yankees batted him 1st. They batted him 4th. They batted him 5th. They batted him 6th. He's all over the place, and he's not getting the job done. I don't think it's his fault, though. I think they're putting too much pressure on the guy, and now he's back to 9th. Are the Yankees messing him up?
I don't think they are. There's been a lot of prospects, really well-regarded prospects, who've come up, and they've had very similar experiences. So I'm thinking about Adley Rutschman last year, who was batting like 180 through 2 months. Jared Kelenic, who broke out this year for the Mariners, but had a couple of years of really struggling. This year, I believe Julio Rodriguez, who was basically the hottest rookie in the game last year, really having a tough season. And we can go down the list of other players. And I think Volpe's just kind of in that mode. I mean, Major League pitching is really good. And at first, I think Volpe was really successful because he was taking a lot of pitches and taking a lot of walks, and Major League pitchers were allowing him to get on base. And now they've kind of figured out how to strike him out. And he's striking out a lot. He's been very bad recently. I don't think there's a relationship between where he's batting and the order. I mean, his best work was done batting 1st. But his best work was also done in the first month of the season when Major League pitchers hadn't figured him out yet. Now they have. And it's a test of a player whether or not they'll make that adjustment. I think Volpe will. But I also think you have to question of whether or not he's their best option at shortstop right now. Oswald Peraza is killing it down at AAA. And killing it meaning he's hitting 329, 380, 577. He has about a 16% strikeout rate, so he's not striking out a lot, hitting home runs. And we know he's probably a better defensive shortstop than Volpe. And I think that he deserves to be a major league player. They're not playing him at third base. So they could say, our long-term plan for Peraza is that he is not going to be in Anthony Volpe's position. Instead, ever since he got injured, he got sent down. He was playing second a little bit and shortstop primarily. And I think there's a world where you consider flipping them. It would not shock me in the future to find out that Oswald Peraza had a better major league career than Volpe. I mean, he has the defensive chops. I think Volpe has looked good on defense, but not great on defense. I think his worst look was down in Tampa, but that could be about playing on turf for the first time ever. But still not great, frankly, right? Like I think Peraza is a special defensive player, and I would like to see him there. But there's also no place to play Volpe other than second or short, and second has Gleyber Torres really playing very well.
What does
So
that
do you
do for his
consider?
confidence? If you anoint him as the next Derek Jeter, and then 3 months into his career, he's back in the minor
Mhm.
leagues with a sub 200 batting average.
I mean, I don't really like this kind of armchair psychology with baseball. These are professionals. They're very well paid. They're elite at their sport. And if they're not performing, then you send them down. Is the hype machine a little strong where you end up again, like, having obvious comparisons to Derek Jeter or whatever? Yes. But that's just something Volpe's going to have to deal with. If he can't deal with it, he's not a major league player. I think he's been valuable I think he is a major league player, right? I think even through this very tough stretch, he's a good enough base runner and he's a good enough defender at an important position that he clearly belongs in the majors. But the question is he helping the team win right now any more than their other options? And I'm not sure if the answer to that is yes. I don't think you should treat players as so fragile that you couldn't send them down to AAA to work on stuff. And if Volpe really is a future major league player, he'll kill it at AAA, which is exactly what happened to Peraza. Peraza was a major league player last year. He started a playoff game last year. He came to spring training. He didn't look great in spring training, but didn't screw up. And then he gets sent down. He eventually gets called up, thrown around the diamond, gets injured, gets sent back down. And now he's hitting 330, right? Or whatever I just said, right? He's killing it. That's a major league player, right? I mean, if Volpe gets sent down, then he should be the one to respond. I don't think he's going to. I think they're going to keep bring him out there, giving him some time. Again, this is what a lot of top prospects have done. Jared Kelenic, Adley Rutschman, they went through this period and they adjusted back. But there is a question of playing time, right? Should Peraza be getting that playing time? There's a bunch of players the Yankees are going to get rid of before they send Volpe down, like Bowers, Calhoun, Cabrera, who's looked much worse. And so I don't think this is something that we're going to see rushed anytime soon. But if a month from now we're still talking about Volpe hitting 200, I think I think they're going to start thinking about that. That said, Aaron Judge, his major league debut was awful. I think Gary Sanchez's major league debut was pretty uneventful. This is not uncommon for prospects, but I'd be lying if I said I wasn't a little bit worried that I had as much confidence in Volpe as I did a month ago. A month ago, he looked like rookie of the year candidate, right? And now he's hit about 150 since then. Now he come up clutch in some spots. It's I think a good sign to see him like hitting a big sack fly in extra innings and that kind of thing. I think the base running is still impressive, but it's not great. But it's just kind of how prospects go. Prospects are luck of the draw. Think about Clint Frazier. There were periods where Clint Frazier looked like a star, right? I mean, he was hitting very well at points, and defense eventually is what got him sent down. But when he went, I forget the numbers, but when he got sent down for defense initially in like 2018, whatever that was, he had like an OPS above 800. I mean, he was really hitting. and something's unraveled there, and he ended up not being a major league player. Um, I don't think that's Volpe's case. Volpe is still young enough that if you send him down to AAA, it's like he's still ahead of schedule. But it's a concern.
Yeah, I just think I'm not happy with the way the Yankees handled their prospects. Peraza came up last year and he sat the bench, and then he's in the lineup, he's out of the lineup. Cabrera comes up, he's an infielder, they throw him in the outfield. Gary Sanchez didn't work. He had a great start. He was supposed to be the heir apparent. People were saying, would you trade? I mean, granted,
They called him up and he hit like 20 home runs in a month. Right?
correct.
I mean,
But and DeGrom ends up getting hurt a lot. But there was talk like I wouldn't even trade him for DeGrom. Sanchez is the greatest of all time. Well,
yeah,
he's
who was
not.
that talk? Do you think Brian Cashman is turning down that trade in 2017, whatever it is?
He
No,
might have.
yeah.
I mean,
I don't know.
who knows?
I don't know about that.
It's just the Yankees have an issue, except for this guy in right field, Aaron Judge. The amount of Yankees who have come up and become very good ball players is not really very
Yeah,
many.
I throw Torres in there. I think it's fair to put Gleyber Torres in the very good category.
He's
I
been
think
very
Gary
good.
Sanchez was the best catcher in baseball for like 2 years, or at least one of the best, right?
Couldn't sustain it.
Yeah, but he was also
Miguel
a big.
Andujar, Greg
Miguel Andujar,
Bird,
I think was just lucky. I mean, I was never an Andujar fan from the start.
Mike Ford.
It's Mike Ford was not a top prospect. That'd be like complaining that Andreas Chopra doesn't turn out well.
Oh, he's more like
I
Chris
think
Gittens.
the Yankees have been batting kind of low lately, in terms of prospects. Right? They are. I think Frazier is the big unexpected failure. I think he was the best prospect to not be successful, or not have any real major league success. You can look at guys like Esteban Florial, but I wouldn't put him in the same league as Volpe and Peraza and Frazier and all those guys. Prospects are a gamble,
right? So
and you don't get that many shots at it, right? You get 10 top prospects in a decade, and if half of them work out, then you have a pretty good team. But if 3 out of 10 work out, then you have a problem, and that's kind of what happened to the Yankees.
Correct. And so I guess our disagreement here would be, I believe when you have something that's really precious, you take it easy on that precious thing. You treat it with some kid gloves. And I think Anthony Volpe was the really precious thing. And all of a sudden you take a kid.
It's like you're assuming there's a psychological.
I think there's a lot of pressure to playing in the major leagues, and I think then becoming the Yankee shortstop is huge. It's a ginormous thing, and the pressure that you must feel by becoming the Yankee shortstop has to be ginormous. And then if that wasn't enough, within 20 games of his big league career, they're like, "Hey, kid, you're so good. You're going to lead off." Like,
the thing is,
what?
it's not that uncommon in the major leagues for that for players to jump into the majors that quickly. And I just think it's just a talent question, right? Like, is he good enough?
But if you bat leadoff, if you come into the major leagues and you become the leadoff hitter on the Kansas City Royals, which I still think is a lot of pressure, it's okay. You're on the Kansas City Royals. They're going to go 73 and 94 this year, whatever the numbers are. Like, who cares? You're going to be the shortstop on the Yankees, and within your first month of your career, you're batting leadoff on a team that's supposed to win the World Series. You're putting an untold amount of pressure on this guy. And you know what? Sometimes that kind of pressure can break a guy. It can ruin him. It's happened before.
The thing is, I don't think we see any evidence of him kind of cracking under pressure. I just think, like, look how pitchers are pitching him, right? I mean, he right now has not proven that he can hit the breaking ball. That's just the problem, right? Like, and that's a common problem for young players, and some of them will figure it out and some won't. And I don't think it's a pressure problem. I don't think this changes. Maybe if he had another year of AAA, right, that'd be a little easier transition. But either way, eventually he's got to learn how to hit the breaking ball. And there's if he's going to strike out 30% of the time, he's not a major league player. I don't care about the pressure or not. He's not a Kansas City Royal. He's not a New York Yankee. The big leagues have are big everywhere. And there's a lot of teams where, look, it may not be New York, but it's a pretty big environment. And they bring up rookies all the time and they do fine.
Right, but they don't have
Um,
67 different newspapers and 430 different TV channels and everybody in the locker room. You go to
yeah,
these other
and
towns, are like, well, we have one beat reporter. You're not on the back
yeah, but
page
the
of the New York.
Dodgers are a big market team. The
Yeah, I
Mets
think
are a
they
big
handle the
market
rookies
team.
better. We'd have to look at
Yeah.
it and really
Well, I
analyze.
just
I don't
think
know how
they
many
have better,
rookies are
they
batting
have more
leadoff.
talent. I think I would hypothesize, and I don't have the time to evaluate this, but I would hypothesize that the Yankees have about a major league average hit rate with prospects, and that's normal, right? Like that's average. Like they bring a bunch of guys up, and some fail and some don't, and some of it's just luck of the draw. Volpe came up and with all that pressure performed really well. And I don't think it's pressure that's preventing him from hitting right now. I think he's just not made the adjustment and he might not be able to. That's the other problem here. He is not a big guy. He may not be able to reach the fastball in the bottom part of the zone, or he might have to be cheating a little bit in order to hit some things. And that's leaving him exposed. And major league pitchers have figured it out. It's common. I mean, again, Julio Rodriguez, I think, is an example of a guy who really is not a pressure. He does not appear to be someone who caves to pressure, right? He is a guy who's like a very outward facing player. And he was really talented last year and he looked like the next A-Rod. And this year, pitchers just found a hole. I think that's normal. It's what we should expect. I think a worse team, forget the pressure, a team that's not trying to win, they can just roll with it, right? They can be like, don't really care what your numbers are. Go out there and, you have a spot in the lineup every day. And the problem is that the Yankees aren't that team, right? The Yankees are trying to make the playoffs. They're trying to catch the Orioles and the Rays. And I think that's the way they have to make decisions. On today, where does batting Volpe give me the best chance to win the game? Right. A month ago, the answer was leadoff because there were like 4 batters in the entire lineup, right? And if that, not even 4, there were 3, right? I mean, you had, cleanup hitter Willie Calhoun. Today, that answer is 9th or 7th or something like that because the Yankees have 4 or 5 really good major league batters at the top of the order. I don't think they should put a very much weight at all on Volpe's fragile psychological state when making that decision. And I don't think they will. I think the Yankees are batting Volpe 9th right now because he's not hitting anything. And the only reason why he's still in the lineup is because they don't really have another shortstop on the roster, or Oswaldo Cabrera is hitting just as badly or worse. And Peraza's in the minors. Peraza's now got 20 games of elite performance at AAA. And I think there's a good, strong case to be made that he would be the best option to start at shortstop, and you should flip him in Volpe and then give Peraza a chance to hit well or not well. Peraza's been a pretty good major league hitter throughout his career. And
the little that he played, yes.
Sure, but I mean, I have confidence that Peraza is probably a pretty good major league player. I've been saying this whole time that I think he's the shortstop and Volpe is playing somewhere else. I was joking about Volpe in left field for half the offseason. I still think that's a good idea. They still don't have a left fielder. If Kiner Falefa can do it, why can't Volpe do it? A little guy named Roy White did it, right? Moved from second base to left field. I learned by reading today a little book right here, which we can talk about.
What a great transition!
Right,
all right, let's go there.
And so, like, why is Volpe any more fragile than any of these other guys? He seems like a guy with a pretty good head on his shoulders.
Yeah, you never. I just think if again, I'll say it again. I think you don't rush him. You let him play, do your thing, kiddo. Have some fun. Derek Jeter batted 9th most of his rookie year. You don't put that kind of pressure. Maybe he could do it. Maybe he can't do it. Why even risk finding out if he can do it or not? When you have somebody like this, he's my shortstop of the next 20 years. Bat him 9th. Let him play bat 9th. Good luck, kiddo. And you'll contribute. We look forward to 2024 when with a year under your belt, we'll think about not batting you 9th. But anyway, talk about that book. What book did you just read, or are you still engrossed in it?
I have just finished it.
Oh, nice.
Roy White, From Compton to the Bronx.
Beautiful book.
By Roy White and Dr. Paul Semendinger. Also, one thing, Paul, that in all of your discussion of this book on this show and other places, You didn't mention that you got some pretty heavy hitters also writing for this book. So you have other essays in this book that I was not aware of until I started reading, from people like Willie Randolph, kind of a big deal, all talking about Roy White. You got Chris Chambliss, John Sippen, Ray Negron, Murray Bauer, Ian Dixon, and of course Marty Appel writing the foreword. It's a wonderful book. I have some questions, and I'm wondering if you have any more details that you left out. One problem with a book like this is that I'm sure you talk with White for a very long time and have a lot of notes, and I had to cut a lot of it or most of it just to make it down to a book. And there's a section here about White. So White is a mixed race player. His mother is black, his father is white. And in 1962, he begins in the minor league, first in Florida for spring training, and then Greensboro, North Carolina for, I think, Class B ball. I always forget that there was things before A ball, but Class B ball, one of those low minor league towns, minor league levels. And it's still in the middle of segregation. This is 1962, right? We're still marching for civil rights at the time. And White is a kid from California, a very integrated place. He says in the book that he felt like he was never treated differently because of the color of his skin in California. I don't believe that 100%, but I believe it 90%, right? Especially from the perspective of an 18-year-old kid. I'm curious if he relayed any other stories to you that you didn't put in the book about what it was like just being thrust into the segregated South after growing up in California in 1962.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Off the top of my head, did I talk about him being the name calling? I think I did. I think I mentioned that there was name calling from the stands. I don't think I necessarily put in some of the things that were said that were rude and obnoxious. And
Right, yeah.
Roy White has this this great ability to compartmentalize, maybe if that's the word. He knew he was a very talented baseball player. And he experiences the segregation, he experiences the racism, but he doesn't let it affect his play on the ball field. I mean, he would hear the stuff and he would just say, I have to rise above it. I can't let it bother me. And when I asked him questions about how much did this bother you, and I've said this story to a lot of people in podcasts and in other venues and things, but I think it would be a natural human reaction to say, I'm angry. I'm still angry about this. This was wrong. And I think he is, as anybody would be, but he doesn't sit there holding grudges and saying things like that. In fact, the comment that he always comes back to is other people who came before me had it much rougher. I was following in their footsteps, which is amazing. There was a story, though, that's not in the book about segregation, as he goes into a restaurant during one of his minor league years down in the South. And he sits down and there was an African-American waitress and she goes to wait on his table and she says, you can't eat here. And he's like, yeah, but you can work here. She goes, yeah, I can work here, but you can't eat here. They're not going to serve you here. And he goes, well, if you can work here, I can eat here. And she's like, no, you can't be here. And that really outraged him. That he was very upset about that. She said, we can get you something if you go to the back. We'll give you something to go, but you can't stay here. That story did not make it into the book.
I would have loved to see that in the book, honestly.
Yeah, that actually came out during an interview we had after the book. And I was what a great story. But it never, that wasn't like it was left on the cutting room floor.
At one point, he's playing for, I think, a Class C team called the Georgia Confederates. I can't imagine what that feels like.
Yeah, can you imagine? And by the way, Mike Whiteman, thank you for the great comment. I appreciate that.
The Confederate Yankees, that's an oxymoron there. That's at another point, when he's first shows up at spring training, I guess people don't realize that he's black. And so he briefly is allowed to go to the normal team hotel. And then eventually it sounds like basically he's kind of being surprised on the bus on his way to his first minor league assignment in Greensboro, North Carolina. And then someone comes to the back of the bus and says, like, okay, you need to wait here while the rest of the team gets off and we'll bring you to your hotel right afterwards.
And it wasn't a hotel. They stayed in like boarding houses and things like that. They played it. They stayed in the black.
There was loud music nearby or something. Yeah, it was not a great situation. It sounds like. Was he observed? Like, you don't. I mean, this is a book about baseball and about Roy White. Was he experiencing the broader civil rights movement that's going on at that time? Was he noticing? I mean, he was a kid, obviously, playing baseball and without a ton of communication with the outside world, I'm sure. But is he, does he feel in the minors, Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Act of '63, which is again just a year after he starts? Is that all kind of entering into his psyche?
I don't know that. I can't say yes or no because that kind of conversation we didn't have with that kind of
Mhm.
specifics. When we would talk, his focus at that point was on baseball, and I think
Mhm.
baseball operated in its own little world. If you were a part of baseball, you were part of your baseball world, and that's what he was experiencing. I'm sure that other stuff was happening
Mhm.
around and people were taking notice, but it wasn't directly. And look, we know, as you know, about talking about lots of players in the 60s and the 70s. There was even a great documentary, I forget if it was on HBO or something, about Willie Mays, and Willie Mays
Mhm.
doesn't even really get involved
Mhm.
in a lot
And
of
he's
that.
about 10 years. He's a little bit earlier, right? He's
Correct, correct, but during the 60s, after the Giants moved to San Francisco, Willie Mays, there's a situation where he wants to buy a house, but it's in a neighborhood that really doesn't accept African Americans, and that becomes a contentious thing. And they cheer him on the field, but they don't accept him into the community off the field. And he's the great Willie Mays. And there was some controversy, maybe in retrospect, that maybe Willie Mays needed to speak out more. This was all in this documentary. I think it was on HBO. And people said, no, he spoke out, but he spoke out the way most people spoke out in the locker room and with other people, but he didn't do it. uh, He didn't have a big media presence about the way he handled this, these unfortunate situations. And I think, when you saw the guys who started speaking out, there was a lot of pushback against guys like Richie Allen and Reggie Jackson and players who actually were saying things aren't good, and we have to have better situations around us and we're not being treated fairly. There was a lot of pushback there. And so I think when you're just a young kid and you're just getting caught up in the whole
Mhm.
thing and trying to play baseball, that I think um his world was really baseball at that point. Long
I mean,
answer.
it's fascinating timing, right? Because he's entering the segregated South, but also in a period where black players are just normalized in baseball. There are some of the biggest stars in Major League Baseball are black. Jackie Robinson was well over was over a decade earlier, and yet the rest of the country hasn't caught up to baseball. Jackie Robinson really was ahead of the country in a lot of ways.
Mm,
But were you on that episode of the Bronx Beat podcast where we talked to Mary Craig?
I was not.
Um, we did a wonderful episode. We talked to Mary Craig of
I think that
this is
was
Florida
rescheduled
scientist.
because we were going to do it. I was ready to do it, and then I think it was rescheduled. Maybe
Oh,
I
see,
was there actually in
I actually think
retrospect.
I thought it was you and Andy
It
who were
was me
there
and
with her.
Andy. We were there.
And Mary wrote this wonderful dissertation that will hopefully be a book pretty soon, or she's right out. I don't know if she's defended it yet. Where she looks at kind of the Jackie Robinson in the history of American politics and American political theory, and kind of how this ethos of baseball just intersects with Jackie Robinson in really interesting ways. But that's all well in the past by the time White comes up. But the grander politics is not, right? I mean, we're entering the civil rights era just as he enters the minor leagues. By the end of his career, it's a completely different era.
Absolutely.
It's an era post Civil Rights Act. I mean, racial politics never go away, but it's a much different world and a much more equal world. It's a world where you would never think of pushing Major League Baseball players out of a hotel because they're black. And people like Reggie Jackson can be the straw that stirs the drink, and that's a that's part of the story there. Um, and then my second favorite part of the book happens, which is White retires. There's all sorts of stuff in between, right? The whole Yankee career thing is in between, and that's great. But he retires and he goes to Japan, or rather, he stops playing Major League Baseball and he plays 3 years in Japan. He plays for the Yomiuri Giants. He hits 300. It's one of the first Major League Baseball players to go to Japan. There was I think a handful of players you listed who had gone before him, and then kind of concurrent with him, there were one or two Major League Baseball players, maximum of two, on all of the teams in Japan, including his former teammate in Compton, Reggie Smith, who takes a spot in the Giants after White goes there. It feels like it was a very, at least at first, like isolating experience for him.
Mm,
That he shows up, he doesn't speak the language, he's not really with the team early on. he's got some kind of weird training that he's not really used to. How does he adjust to that? How did he react to going from the New York Yankees to being alone without his family in Japan?
Two stories. He had a great interpreter who really helped him acclimate. And the team had been away when he first gets there, but I think that's only for like a couple of weeks. He then gets with the team, and the team basically pays him homage. Like, you're Roy White, you're a Yankee, you're a world champion. The training in Japan's a lot different than it is in America. And then Roy White, so they said to Roy White, you don't have to do all the crazy drills that we're doing. I mean, because we give you deference. And Roy White showed that a true teammate is a teammate. And he said, if you guys have to do the drills, I'll do the drills.
And the
I think
drills
that-
are like field 1,000 ground balls today.
Correct.
Right.
Correct.
The incredible drills. Yeah.
He also had a great teammate, John Sippen, who I was able to interview.
Yep.
I found him because Roy White and he had lost contact over the years. And I was able to find him in San Diego or Southern California somewhere, and made contact with him. It's a testimony to Roy White that John Sippen, I don't believe, gives a whole lot of interviews and things like that. But I said, I'm writing a book with Roy White about his career. And you were such a big influence. He was the other American who was on that team. And he really helps Roy White acclimate to living in Japan. The great story, though, is twice in Roy White's life during his career, his kids play a big role indirectly in turning things around. So in 1968, his daughter is born. And by that point, he's not a starting player. He was really great in the beginning of 67, didn't have a great rest of the year, makes the team in 68, but he's sort of like an extra guy, maybe the 24th guy on the roster, if you will. And the team flies out to California, and his daughter had been born, but he had been in spring training. And when it's 1968, players don't leave to be with their wives when they're having a baby. You'll see her someday. You'll see your wife someday, but we're not giving you time off. That just wasn't done. And so he gets there and he finally meets his daughter and he sees his wife again. And the daughter's fussy that night. And he says to his wife, you deserve the rest. I'll stay up with her. I'm not playing tomorrow anyway. And he gets to the ballpark and finds out he is playing, and he has a huge day. And basically his career takes off from that point forward. Similar thing happens in Japan. He goes out in February. His kids are in school. They can't just leave and up their whole lives. And so they don't get out there till June. And then the first game that his son comes to see him in Japan, he got off to a great start, but then the Japanese pitchers, like we were talking about with Volpe, start pitching him differently, and he gets into a little bit of a funk. He brings his son to the game, and he hits 3 home runs, for a couple from either side of the plate, including a game winner, I think, in the 10th inning. And again, that his career just stays on an upward arc the rest of that year and for the next couple of years where he's in Japan. So kind of fun how his kids play a big role in his success.
Yeah. Excuse me. Yeah. And they had to see their father go to Japan at a time when it wasn't easy to communicate back in the United States. I can't imagine what that would have been, but that must have been like traveling during that time. I'm sure it was much different than traveling today. I think it's much easier today for people to go there and either catch get their family over for a relatively cheap flight compared to back in the day, or Zoom them or whatever. Then he becomes a coach, and has an off and on coaching career over quite a long time. I had forgotten that he was a coach on the 2004-2005 Yankees. Really incredible coaching staff. Joe Torre is your manager, but then Mattingly, Mel Stoudemire, Roy White, Luis Soho, and then one other player of note was on that coaching staff. So he intersects with kind of the modern Yankees. I mean, he at one point, tells A-Rod to use a different bat, right? And which to me is just fascinating. What was it like at the end of his career? Did he mention that? How baseball had changed while he was coaching, and I mean, it must be for someone who starts playing in the 60s, watching the mid 2000s baseball must be something else.
Yeah, and he says even today, because when we go do various events, people always ask him, "What do you think about the players of today?" one of the things Roy White did, and he did it the old-fashioned way. This is what you did in the 60s, right? You choke up if there's 2 strikes. You don't want to strike out. Strikeouts are bad. And you put the bat on the ball and you do all the little things. Bill James has made the argument in his books that Roy White was better than Jim Rice. Jim Rice is in the Hall of Fame. He says Roy White was a more valuable baseball player because he could do a lot of things that weren't appreciated. He walked a lot, hit behind runners, took the extra base, played good defense, etc. But he said, like they were even mentioning certain players today at an event a couple weeks ago, and he said none of them have a good 2-strike approach. They're still swinging from their heels. That's why they're doing poorly. They just don't know how to do the right little things to help you get on base and to not strike out and to win ball games. So I think he has obviously seen the vast change, and I don't think a lot of people, when you understand how baseball can be played at a high level, appreciate some of the ways that players are going about it today, because it goes against what they were taught, and it goes against what to them makes a lot of sense as a baseball player.
Well, I mean, Paul, it's a wonderful book. I highly recommend anybody here listening who haven't yet buy it. It's a quick read. I read this in 3 hours today, if that, and it's worth it. It's a great Father's Day gift. Father's Day is coming up. I might actually use this as a Father's Day gift. Pretty good one. And I'm just very happy about this. And I know, Paul, you have other book plans in the future, and I can't wait to read that next book. So everybody buy Roy White, From Compton to the Bronx, by Paul and Roy White.
That's awesome. Thank you. And listen, Roy White was just unbelievable to work with. There's always the worry when you meet somebody who you look up to, who's a superstar or a baseball player. A lot of people have clay feet. A lot of people disappoint you. A lot of people, turn out to be less than what you think they're going to be. That wasn't the case with Roy White. Roy White turned out to be more than I ever thought he'd be. Always when you read all those other essays by Chambliss, by Sippin, by Randolph, by Murray Bauer, by Ian Dixon, by Marty Appel, they all say dignity. Ray Negron, classy, upstanding human being. And that's what he is. In every way, shape, and form. He's a good human being who happens also to have been a Yankee legend. And so, my life is inherently better because of the fact that I had a chance to work with Roy White for a year. And again, I don't think a lot of people can say that after they've interviewed a lot of people or spent time writing a book with somebody or about somebody. Sometimes they go, well, I'm very happy with the fact that my experience was the exact opposite of that. It was nothing but positive, and it continues to be nothing but positive. So yeah, thank you so much. And again, we'll bring up that quote from the great Mike Whiteman. It's a great book. Yes. Thank you, Mike. I'm telling you, everybody's telling me that they really love it. It's been great. I've done a lot of podcasts, a lot of SABR meetings, a lot of library visits, and a number of events with Roy White. And
the book's selling. That's the important part, right?
And it is.
It sells it. They let you write another one. So
yes, it's that's the big thing. So yeah, it's great. And you know what? With that, EJ, why don't we wrap it up? We have some things to talk about, but I think our other topics are bigger and longer and more detailed. And there's no crime with ending a show a little early. We covered a lot of things today, and a lot of people have to go back to work tomorrow. We have the nice long Memorial Day weekend. And so this has been the Start Spreading the News podcast. I'll be back again Saturday morning with the Dr. Sem Show, and EJ and I'll be back again always every Monday night at 9 p.m. Let's hope when we see you next week, the Yankees have had a great West Coast trip. Have a great day, everyone.